At a time when we're losing our oldest and most precious trees and forests from around the world, I'm curious to understand if and why this matters to all of us. Welcome to the Meaning of Trees podcast. I'm Tom Hill, and it's here that I meet with people from all walks of life to explore the answers to one essential question. What do trees mean to you? Storytelling and the arts have forever gone hand in hand when it comes to trees and forests. And my guest today, Luke Adam Hawker, is an artist with a powerful talent for harnessing and sharing their appeal through the moving and beautiful images that he creates. Luke is not just an artist, but an author, an ambassador for Woodland Trust, and a loving father and husband. And I came away from the chat that I'm about to share with you with a massive sense of respect for his take on life, the way he has lent into the challenges that it's thrown at him over the last few years, and the deep affinity that he shares with all things arboreal. Hi, thanks for hosting us, Luke, and for sitting down to chat. I'm really sorry that in setting up for the podcast, I broke one of your lamps just now.
That's okay. I'll send through the bill.
Yeah. I don't know if it's replaceable because it looks like a one-off, but
Don't worry about it. It's fine. We'll turn that away from the room, so it'll be facing the wall. No one needs to know.
Thanks so much. But yeah, I owe you a lamp. Hopefully you're sitting comfortable.
A bit too comfortably, actually.
But yeah, you're an artist that creates beautiful, I would say, spellbinding visual representations of trees, and you're a storyteller too. And can I ask you to begin with telling us what trees mean to you?
It's such an interesting question because it's changed. So I think what they mean to me now is a lot more than what they might have meant, say, even a decade ago. I guess in a nutshell, I now have a relationship with trees. That to a lot of people might sound strange, but I think to a lot of your listeners might resonate that once they're a part of our day-to-day lives, we naturally are drawn towards them and spending time with them. And I think that as my life's gone on, I prioritize my time among the trees more. And I think that now it's an interesting question in that you could almost say everything because they've intertwined with so much of my life. For example, I draw them. So they're a kind of a muse for me. They mean connection. They're a way for me to connect with the natural world and feel part of it, which we are. And then looking at my son, for example, that magic of him connecting with the trees through nature, just a simple touch, like this longing to touch the bark, which I think is a very human way to connect with our surroundings through touch, that as we grow up and as we become adults is kind of restrained. You know, you're worried about kind of all your senses, just the way you act, I think, is kind of becomes more considered. So to have that lesson from him, I mean, I walk amongst the trees with my dog, Robin, and they're just a landscape that I long to be in. And I think the most perfect representation of a heaven, if you believe in it, or even if you don't, you know, that idea of like this perfect place for me is a woodland. So I don't know if that answers it to a degree, but they mean a lot. Is how I'd summarize.
No, I really like how you've articulated that. And I guess for me, and just kind of building an understanding for our listeners about who you are and then the role that trees might play in your life, I think it would be interesting to just briefly explore, what does art mean to you?
I could almost mirror the same answer. So let's say the trees are, for example, the subject. Art is a way for me to connect with that subject. And when you ask that question, I hear it in my own art. So art generally is like, let's not get into the meaning of that. That's my dog having a scratch. Better now, Robin? Good. But art really means my art, it's like a vessel. It's not a vessel, that's the wrong word. It's a way of connecting with what I love, and also it's just a way of spending time and focusing. When I'm drawing, I always try and tell people I'm not drawing for a result, I'm not drawing for an end goal. I'm drawing for drawing's sake, and it's become a very meditative process, like extremely, and that's what I love about introducing people to drawing for the first time, or often coming back to drawing, is that it's a perfectly viable and brilliant way to connect with your surroundings. Art is a means of connection, and what's great is because I focus so heavily on process and connection, is that the people that connect with the art normally go full circle and come through the process to the subject, which is often trees, but it might be architecture as well, and people. So art is a conversation and a way of connection.
Yeah, and a lot of your work, you feature trees, but also buildings, and sometimes juxtapose trees with urban locations and lots of people. And I wonder how your influences have kind of been shaped and formed by your training in design and architecture, and where there might be a crossover actually. And what's your appreciation like for how trees might speak of a natural architecture? And we often see that in buildings too.
Yeah, and I think that like great architecture, kind of my interpretation of great architecture has changed. So when I was going through university, so I studied interior architecture and design, and I was a designer, interior designer for 7 years before becoming an artist. And I think that at first I was very much interested in buildings that were powerful and were kind of the landmark. And as time has gone by, I've gravitated towards buildings that are more humble. So this is a bit of a tangent, but I guess what I'm saying is the architecture that I long to build as a student is very different from, let's say, the architecture that I actually want to celebrate now, which is vernacular, cabins, things that are basically lower than trees. And I think when you talk about how it's influenced, I think I only really understood trees and their importance fully once I started to draw them.
Yeah.
And I was drawing buildings primarily, so they were like the big thing in my life. And when I started drawing trees, that was a game changer, because I realized of how the importance of trees has shifted historically. I've got a perfect example, I think, of an artwork that explores that. So a series of artworks I created called Out of Place, where for this one, for example, I drew an amazing sequoia that was actually growing not far from here in the Surrey Hills. And so I drew that for the day at the easel. I took that into Trafalgar Square and replaced Nelson's column with that tree. Is in a way this kind of hypothetical question of how we view trees in our built environment. They seem very separate, right? It's you think of a city as buildings and the surroundings as trees, if you're lucky enough. And this integration of trees, and specifically ancient ones and woodlands, that is missing from our society. And I think that is telling in how we behave and how we act and how we think. And really that project where I'm taking another example, I'm taking an amazing ancient oak tree into the middle of Piccadilly Circus and replacing the Eros with this amazing tree. And so many people, whilst I'm drawing it, because I do draw on location, came past, but I wish that was there. I wish that was there. There's this longing for trees to be in our landscape and where most of us are. And I think, look at our population focus, it is in cities, but also it's just void of ancient trees, often lining streets and kind of more planted maybe in a Victorian area with these amazing plane trees. And I'll take trees in any form and in any location, but really to have a tree at the center of our built environment, I think is key. And I hope that instead of looking to build monuments, I think going forward it'd be great if we start thinking about growing them, not for our own enjoyment. Just imagine, instead of Nelson's column, there's a stand of sequoias in the middle of Trafalgar Square. That's the monument. And the future generations, maybe, let's say 1,000 years from now, let's go big, 1,000 years from now, they're looking back. They're going to judge us on that monument far more fondly than Nelson's Column, which was ultimately forged from stone, quarried stone, and then the metal from the guns and cannons formed and I'm not saying it's not an amazing piece of architecture, a piece of history, not saying that at all, but I think we're now at the standpoint in history where we need to change our relationship, change the way we're acting. So I want cities, I want our built environment to now plant monuments. Plant monuments. Trees aren't just monuments, but much better than being void from that landscape and that conversation. I would love for that to happen.
Just reflections on what you said there. So already you've spoken about connection and trees being symbols of connection. And I find that interesting that you're pointing to the fact that things like Trafalgar Square with the Battle of Trafalgar, that's kind of celebrating us being able to and being able to conquer. And actually, I guess in the world today, a lot of people, ourselves included, are probably thinking there's been enough of that now.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, we need to breathe more space and time into the places where we live to allow things to grow and vitality to come through. And trees are a symbol of that, aren't they?
They are. And I think that's a good point. Often wars and conflicts in general is a byproduct of the pursuit of progress between different nations and different peoples, different religions, and the other people are being in the way somehow of that progress. So if progress is at the core of a lot of conflict, it's almost redefining progress. And I think we're starting to wake up to that. At times I feel pessimistic about it, other times I feel optimistic. But when we understand that progress isn't necessarily having more of what we have, but it might be looking at how we're thinking about what we have, that will be the thing that kind of changes. It's really tricky to fight the general feeling of apathy about the world that's growing. But the only way you can fight that is with basically action and positivity and trying to get, I think, some magic back in the world. And I think especially kind of bringing that back in from nature. I think there's a reason why the world is going the way it's going. And I think that reason is a disconnect from nature. Look at all the cultures that have been so connected in the past and so few remain. And you think, yeah, that's why.
Yeah, I've followed your lovely Instagram videos for a while now. And one of those that really stuck with me was about your relationship with anxiety and a tendency to live in the future. I saw a quote that you put on in one of them, actually. Perhaps you could explain a little more about that for me.
Yeah, so that was, I can't remember who said that to me, but I think it might have even been through one of my followers saying that like our anxiety is just living in the future. And I think we've experienced a lot of anxiety the last few years, mainly around my son's health. And it just, the penny dropped. And it's when you hear something that is so, like it connects so much, and then you go back to your age, and I was like, oh, I'm 36 and I've just heard that series of words that has now had an impact and is helping. It's really helping. And then that sowed through not just fighting anxiety, but also generally just being more present. So it's just this presence. And then I think that's also, like I said, anxiety from fatherhood, but also if you take that message and apply it to especially fatherhood, because it's prevalent, like children especially, they almost can't help but be present. And that's why they're inspiring and why they're so important to us adults who might have been, our lives are complicated. And I think our lives are overly complicated. So you then, because it's complicated, you start to forecast into the future a lot. And it's just unhealthy.
Yeah, you spoke a bit about your son, Harry, who's 4, is that right?
He's 4 in March, so yeah, it's getting there.
And since he came into your life, he has provided great inspiration to you, but also challenges as well, I guess, which must have really come through in your creative processes. Would you like to speak a little bit more about that?
I'd love to. Harry has completely transformed my world. And I think that that's a common thought with a lot of parents. And it's like you say, there's been a lot of challenges with Harry's health. In essence, that's increased the amount of inspiration and like the love I feel for him and respect I have for him. So, like, I think in the early days we struggled a lot with the uncertainty around Harry, and now we're just much better at dealing with all of that because Harry is giving us so much back now. So Harry has Klinefelter syndrome, otherwise known as XXY. He has an extra X chromosome. So a male will have XXY and a female XX. So he won't produce testosterone, which means that has lots of implications, health implications. In addition, there's other question marks over, just the traumatic nature of the labour and how that's impacted Harry's milestones, global milestones. So all that's been a journey, but ultimately it's stripped us all back to what really matters, which is he's happy. And his source of happiness is often simple. And that's where it's inspiring, is because it's just that joy from the simple things that I think has changed me as a person. I had a lot of people and family saying that after fatherhood, I became quite serious. And that's something that I think over the last year, I think I've got a bit more of that fun back. And I think it's not, fatherhood hasn't taken it away from me, but Harry's given it back. I'm just laughing all the time with him. Although his troubles have made me more serious because I was living in the future and worried about that, he's then come in and brought it back. He's just an amazing human being. And so I'll give you an example. I could speak all day on this, but I'll give you an example and then maybe but I had written the book, The Last Tree I created. There's an image of where Olive comes through the pain. She touches this ancient sweet chestnut and she's just reaching out and touching the bark. And the line is, they had their conversation in silence. And Lizzie my wife Lizzie was pregnant with Harry at that time. And I had no idea how poignant that sentence become, Harry being nonverbal, and just how he connects with people, place.
Yeah.
It's just amazing. You do not need speech to interact and connect. And I think that space of nonverbal communication is so underrated and underestimated. And I mean, take, for example, most people's experience of a nonverbal relationship is with their dogs, right?
Yeah.
And
so true.
And I think we know how powerful those can be. But what I find interesting is that this non-verbal space is a space we need more appreciation of, because there's magic in it. We might find it more prevalent because we like to spend time among the trees and we understand that connection. But I think everyone can understand that connection. It's just being open to it. I'm currently drawing and writing a book on non-verbal communication, the beauty of it, celebrating it really, and Harry's journey, and the relationship between my son and my dog Robin, which has been so inspiring. And it's called To Those Who Speak. And it's really an open invitation whereby what I'm saying really in that is that everyone speaks. It's just how we might listen and how we interpret what they're saying. So that's very much, it lends itself to be so visually led, and I'll put all my emotion into those drawings. So effectively turning my journal into a more structured book to get the message out there of appreciation for nonverbal and not underestimating people and beings that can't speak. And I'd advise everyone just to basically listen a little bit more with their eyes and with their hearts, and not rely on what words we're hearing so much.
Yeah, and I guess Harry's life experience will mean that he is developing his own language, actually, in how he interacts with the world. And what a beautiful thing to observe and, pay attention to. Many ways that we wouldn't otherwise recognise, I guess.
Yeah, and that's the inspiring thing. I feel so privileged. Just for example, just the fact that he's had to learn sign language from like the age of 2.5, he has full understanding, but he just doesn't have the ability to talk back to you. And that is powerful because you are then forced to look for signals and signs beyond words. It's quite transformative. And I used to struggle a lot. I used to feel a lot of sadness around that.
Yeah.
I still do at times, but now it's mainly amazement. And I feel like he's become so good at communicating without words that I hope that maybe one day he will speak words. But in addition to that skill, he will have this amazing emotional intelligence and understanding of non-verbal communication, because often it's what we don't say that really says what we feel.
So true. He'll be able to tell authenticity with a hyper kind of awareness, I'd imagine.
We hope.
Yeah.
We hope so.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for sharing that. And you can probably guess my next question, which is, what role might trees play in the special relationship you've got with Harry and sort of forming his life experiences? And yeah, how do you see him interacting with trees?
It's just been magical. I think, obviously, I've instilled a lot of my love for trees with Harry, but vice versa as well. Because I think there's just natural fascination. I mean, look at them. They are visually stunning. The smell when you go into woodland, it's all consuming. And he's always loved that. And interesting, because Harry struggled to walk for a long time and is still fairly unbalanced, he would be shuffling like really close proximity to the trees. It's a very tactile experience when he's growing up, unable to like be up amongst it, and he's like crawling around it, and he's using the trees as support. And then one time he had a walker, so we wouldn't let it ever stop us going out into the woods, because why would you? And he has just always felt an urge to touch different textures and touch the bark, and it was a real way of having a conversation, not just with him and the tree and vice versa, but with us. And that's what's been really special, is that it hasn't felt like we've had to teach him how to love trees. It's just been instilled and encouraged through experience. And then he also has the habit of waving to the trees. So in the morning, he'll just wave good morning to the trees. And I've encouraged him to say thank you to certain trees. And he knows more species of trees, I think, than a lot of little boys do. Because when we go on our like walks and our runs, he, encourage him to sign. So he does an A for ash and an O for oak, and then a field maple, which is FM, and the letter symbols for FM, F for father, M for mother. So that's the daddy mummy tree. He's like, he has his own interpretation. He's amazingly good at identifying, remembering things. I know that's quite a common trait with Klinefelter XXY, is that where you might have other difficulties, your visual experience is very acute and powerful, and visual memory, photographic memory, things like that is quite common. So it feels like he's got this superpower of tree identification at the moment. I just think that trees are key. I mean, looking out the window now, it's like trees are a big part of our lives, and it's a much richer life for it. And he's been a big part of bringing me closer to the trees, for sure.
Yeah, and it must help living in the most wooded part of England as well. And we went for a short walk around Abinger Roughs before this, and went to find two of the ancient trees there. And you're kind of spoilt for choice in some of the really historic wooded landscapes that you've got to explore here. Hopefully that will help to deepen yours and Harry's connection with trees and forests, and that heaven that you spoke about when you first described them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is almost the frustration. I wish everyone could have that. And I think that going back to, we had this conversation, I was talking about, I work for Woodland Trust, and what they do is so important in terms of looking at tree equity, seeing areas what might be areas of more like deprivation and more challenges. Typically, they don't have that access. They don't have the trees on their doorstep. So they therefore don't have that experience, which for me has been so important for Harry, but not just Harry, but just for everyone's enjoyment. So yeah, we are really lucky, really, really lucky and fortunate to be here. And we have kind of followed them here in a way. Yeah, we followed them.
When I first met you, Luke, it was at an opening for the Last Tree exhibition at Polesden. And I loved your work on display there. And it really has a power to it in how you interpret trees and represent them that speaks loudly to me and has done for some time. And when we were there at that opening, I got chatting to your mum, actually. She probably wouldn't have mentioned this, but we were talking about trees, obviously, it being the theme of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And she actually revealed to me that she, in her mind, speaks to trees. I don't know if she's told you this, but yeah, she probably has. But
yeah,
we
absolutely.
had that, we jammed that out because I said, yeah, I'm a secret tree talker as well, kind of thing. But I found that quite interesting. And
yeah, so my mum is, well, she's incredible, and she's always been very like emotionally open, right? And I think that's been integral to like forming who I am. I'm an emotional person, and I'm quite proud of that, actually. And I think that when we talk about forming relationships with people and trees, as we're talking about trees, that helps. And I think that, that doesn't surprise me that my mum said that she has conversation with trees, because I have conversation with trees. I'm sure you do. And I think it's really interesting that a lot of us have this dialogue in our head. And even if you don't think you're having a conversation with a tree, but if you're looking at a tree and you are simply in your head thinking how beautiful it is, that's a conversation. My mum's really interesting. I mean, she'll see a magpie and she'll say the old saying, like, how's your wife? And yeah, my mum's quirky, and I'm proud of her for it. And I think I've definitely inherited an element of that for sure.
With you being someone with such a deep appreciation for the aesthetic value of trees,
Mm-hmm.
and that then helping to inspire, more around our storytelling and spiritual connection perhaps with trees and that fundamental bond we've got with them, could you bring to life for the listeners a tree that you're particularly fond of? Maybe the sweet chestnut, maybe one of those we saw earlier.
I think it would have to be, it's interesting, I say my tree,
Yeah.
but I don't say mine in terms of sense of ownership, because it's everyone's tree. It's just that it's that dear to me. You say my tree, or our tree rather.
So in your mind's eye, let's imagine we've gone on a walk. The listeners have come with us as well.
And I'm describing the tree.
We're describing the tree. Should we give that a go?
Yeah, definitely. So the path I normally take, it runs past this tree. So you kind of have to look for a small path leading up the hill. And if your eye wanders up, you'll catch a glimpse of it. And you'll find the most amazing gnarled, it's like a frozen storm cloud is how I try and describe it. This chestnut, it's around 600 years old. And it forms a group of chestnuts, actually. If you look around the wood, there's about 8 of these ancient chestnut trees dotted around, but this one is the squattest and gnarliest. And it looks like it's been through so much. And actually, in the time I've known this tree, in the last 5 years, it's dropped a huge, huge limb. And when it dropped, it makes you emotional. At the moment, if you're facing it, and I think a lot of you, if you've seen my work, you've seen this tree. I've drawn it a lot. It's on the front cover of my book. It's throughout the book. And I've done easel drawings of this tree. So it's really just full of life. Areas where it's covered in moss. It steps up. It feels like a tree you want to touch. Yeah. And in the summer, you have to get right up into it. And in the winter, it's just more sculptural, and it's just all year round. It's just as beautiful as the day before, but in a different way. And I just feel like I spoke earlier with you in the woods, kind of like looking like how you how you, if you don't have a religion, but you have a faith and you feel kind of this spirit, you feel like the world is spiritual, but you don't necessarily have a home in any religion or any given faith.
Mm-hmm.
Nature has become that faith for me. And this tree, I'd liken it to a church. If a Christian, it would describe a church. It's my place to go and think and maybe cry or, feel emotion. And I think that everyone needs that. And I think because you've got this society now that is moving away from a lot of religion and organized religion, there's a bit of a void for a lot of people where how do we, if we're not religious because for various reasons, where's our home to feel that spiritual element, which I think a lot of us feel, but don't have a name for, don't have a place for. So for me, it's become my kind of my faith or my place and my spiritual place is the woods or the trees that inhabit it.
Yeah. And when we were chatting earlier, you were saying about how you learned of Harry's complications when he was much younger, when you were up in Scotland, actually a very wild landscape. And that had quite a transformative effect in the long term, that time and place, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were at the start of a 2-week camping trip. I've got a camper van, so we went up to Scotland for 2 weeks with my dog Robin, and this is when Lizzie was pregnant, and we just had the 16-week scan, and then driven up, and then 3 days in, we were just by Loch Lomond, and we had a phone call, and it was they essentially telling us that we need to come back for further tests, and it was a real blow, and it was really. It was just really difficult to process, and we both had a bit of a cry because we were scared. So and we decided we had to drive back that night. We were just setting up ready to sleep there for the night in camp. So I just needed to blow off some steam. I felt like I needed to do something before that long drive. Had lots of emotion, and I didn't feel like it would be beneficial to completely let that go in front of Lizzie.
Mm-hmm.
So I quite literally asked leave of the situation for a moment. I just ran through the trees and found a quiet place and just completely sobbed my heart out. And then I was able then to have the strength and have that release, right?
Mm-hmm.
And focus to then drive us back. And we drove back for 9.5 hours back for the test the next day, and the longest week wait of my life. So from that point, I realized the power of trees to just be a place where you could completely, I guess it's relaxing, isn't it? Just letting your emotion out. But
it's like a form of solace, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's just become a core memory, that experience. And I've had others like it. And I think when we talk about this chestnut, which I just tried to describe verbally, which is impossible, that's a place where I might go to just ask for help. It's just, I'm aware that a lot of people, if they haven't had that maybe connection or relationship with a tree, might be confused by what I'm saying, maybe, or what kind of that depth. And I don't think it's delusion. It's not. It's just a relationship that I've built up that's important to me, and I don't see any difference from my relationship with the woods and the trees into like somebody necessarily finding a religion or finding a faith in any way. I think we need something to believe in, and that's what I've found.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know this already, but for me, I'm only encouraged that people like yourself feel able to speak about this on this podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I think it probably is something that resonates with a lot of people that don't really know how to describe some of this stuff or don't feel socially able to. So I'm really grateful to you for sharing your personal insights in such a heartfelt way. I think it's absolutely what we need in the world. And another one of the main themes in our conversation in the woods just now that kept coming up was storytelling, and how in a world of so much factual information being readily available, particularly with AI now, I mean, I'm seeing daily what's coming up on Google is just, so in depth and like a rabbit warren, really. You want to know about factual stuff, it's all there pretty much at the touch of a couple of buttons. But what isn't there, and will always be much more of a personal kind of find, I guess, is that material around storytelling and stuff that resonates with us. And I know that's what your work speaks to. But what role do you think trees have in telling stories today in the modern era?
Oh, just it's so key, because we have so many existing stories through history and through like the best part of history, I think, about trees. So you look back through like mythology and Celtic tales, the Druids, there's so much to look back on. It's like it's been wiped clean from the psyche of society. We just need to bring a lot of these stories to the foreground. And I think that a lot of the stories we heard growing up were, if you went to a C of E, it would be a lot of biblical. You might have gone to church with a lot of biblical stories. Or in the modern era, it's like there's a disconnect from our ancestry and our past connection to trees that can be revealed through storytelling. There's just so much. I mean, there's like so many authors that are going back to those and touching on those. I mean, we were talking about, for example, the book Overstory, which kind of touches on a lot of historical elements, but also in this very contemporary, powerful way. And I just think we need more storytellers like Richard Powers and Robert Macfarlane, these people that kind of bring them into popular culture. And I think that's what I try and do through my work. I'll do an artwork, and a lot of the etching work I do, it's been inspired by a tale, a story. Because I think ultimately we're in culture. A culture is this patchwork of stories, and it might be told through music, it might be told through art or literature. And that's really powerful. So the more people we have feeding the conversation of culture and art with these nature-derived stories, they could be new ones or old ones. I think as long as we have that conversation and keep that magic alive. I mean, look at Tolkien with Lord of the Rings and the Ents. You think, I wonder how many people that has inspired to think a bit deeper about nature and respect nature a bit more. I think storytelling is the most powerful way to influence. And so yeah, it's everything. And hopefully, my small contribution is through my art, and it might connect with a certain number of people. And I'm lucky in that I get to hear, it's like a bit of a loop. So I have this community on specifically Instagram, actually. There's a lot of people that send me images of trees, and they might go out drawing in the woods, and they'll see what I see, and they'll feel what I feel and connect on a deeper level because they've spent more time there, focused in that meditative state. And they can relay that back and say, oh, I've felt this. Yeah. Whenever they thank me, I feel like thanking them more.
Yeah.
Because you kind of think, oh no, like that's amazing. That makes me feel possibly better than the way you feel, because it's this loop.
Yeah.
And that's a live result feedback of what I'm not necessarily trying to do, but is a result of me doing what I'm doing, which is telling stories through art.
And that actually was one of my questions I wanted to ask you. So knowing that you're so process focused and presence focused, do you have a kind of wish of how your work or your occupation might influence others, your art might influence others?
I guess I don't hope that it does a certain thing.
Yeah.
I just kind of focus on what fascinates me and the stories that fascinate me. And I trust that if I do focus on that, focus on the process,
yeah,
that it will be out in the world and people will connect with it and resonate with it. I think the danger is if I was to reverse engineer it and say, for example, I hope that everyone goes and falls in love with a tree from this artwork. I know that artwork will feel very contrived. So everything I produce has to be from a base level of what I feel. And then, so if I'm drawing, for example, the sweet chestnut that I actually like have this connection with, if I focus on my connection with that tree, that's got a far better chance of connecting with other people. And I think, do you know what I mean? If you turn it on its head,
definitely,
I think that it would just become controlled. And I think that's what's so special about nature, is that it shows a distinct lack of consideration to control and rigidity, and it shows the beauty in spontaneity. And I think that's the lesson on reacting, on being. They're just being. They're just being a tree. And I think that if we could all just be a little bit more, the world would be a better place, really, wouldn't it? So I try and lead by example.
Lovely. The other thing I was going to ask you about was just, and I don't want to provide a spoiler to anyone who's not read it, but perhaps you might give a little bit of background or a scene setting to your book, The Last Tree.
Yeah.
And what I like about that is that it is one you could share with different generations as well. But in your own words, what's that book about?
So the book, The Last Tree, is essentially a hypothetical universe, parallel universe to ours, in a world where trees no longer exist, and what that might look like and how that might feel. And I think that it's done through a fable, really. It's a tale where we have this young protagonist, Olive, who goes on this search for something that's missing in her life. It's an element of fantasy, but in a very recognizable way. The landscape goes from being very built up and treeless, and then she goes on this journey where she is immersed completely in nature. And it's really, again, it's like kind of touching on what we've spoken about and looking at maybe issues that we're facing that might provoke apathy. And instead of focusing on the really big picture, it's focused on hopefully encouraging people to just have a connection, encouraging a personal connection with trees. So the book is interesting in that it's so visually led and visually based, is that it's so open for interpretation. People have come to me saying that it's meant this to them, it's meant that to them. And I could never have dreamt that that's what it might have meant, but that's the power, I think, of visual art and interpretive art. It's open. It's just open. So if you need it for this reason, you might well take it and work it out in your mind to mean that. That's what I love about it. And I think my work will primarily always be image led. I'm working on my third book now as well, of a trilogy with Rob McFarlane, where my focus has to be on, I think, what I'm here for, which is telling stories or starting conversations visually. Rob is doing an amazing job at creating this text, which is so inspiring that my images can kind of feed off that. And it's quite a symbiotic process in that we are very open to each other's suggestions, but ultimately the burden of writing, it feels like a burden sometimes for me because it doesn't feel like a strength, is now in the hands of one of the best writers in the world. And that is a really exciting prospect, because I hope the power of his storytelling through words and my storytelling through the visual art, etchings to be particular, will really connect with people and children and the readers who are the parents. I'm really excited about that.
So enjoying the podcast to a close now, Luke, and thank you so much for all that you've shared. It's been really inspiring to hear about your life and fascination with trees. I wonder if you have any questions for me at all that you might like to ask, or is there anything about trees, and I don't have all the answers, that's for sure. Is there anything you wonder about trees that you wish you knew?
That's a good question. So I'm sure there is. And I think there's an adventure in discovering those, isn't there? And there's a conversation. I think even just our conversation in the woods, you were talking about how you shed more light from that conversation on trees being kind of a much greater source of landmark boundary forming than I'd really kind of considered in depth before. So you've kind of already, just going on a walk, you've kind of shared something. I would love to know, actually, what I find interesting about podcasts is you tend to ask a lot of the questions, and people have become more familiar with you by listening to your podcast. I'm sure they'd love some feedback. So I would actually, instead of like the more factual things about trees, I would actually throw something back at you and ask for like either your favorite tree and why, which might be quite revealing, or really kind of what it is about you that makes you fall so heavily for these trees.
Wow, you've gone there. I invited that, didn't I? Yeah.
Well, you did leave a bit of an open space.
No, fair play. I think the first one, what's my favourite tree? Or I know you have such a reverence for trees that you wouldn't ask it quite so frankly, because you probably know there'll be a few, right?
Of course, yeah.
So yeah, I am asked this question a lot, and for me, I am never able to answer it quickly. Basically, the oldest trees, which I think is probably already apparent through what I have given away in the podcast. But yeah, the oldest trees are the ones that I feel are underdogs, actually. They are perhaps the least appreciated, perhaps the ones that are like hidden away, actually. A lot of them have been lost, so many have been erased from the landscape. But what I love about them is just the fact that tree's still standing there is a symbol of how we know deep down that we need to hang on to something, because we will be relying on it again at some point, is what I believe. And so they are past, but they also are, to me, hope for the future as well. I haven't really even given you a tree though, have I? But yeah, we visited.
I don't think it's necessary. Even when I was asking the question, I felt the folly of it.
I knew you would. Yeah. Yeah, I guess, I suppose to answer the question again, those that fall into the bracket where we're definitely not sure what the age is, that opens a whole other can of worms for me, and one that I really love. I'm very comfortable not knowing the age of a tree. And I actually delight in not knowing, because that already sends my brain to a different place. I'm like into wonder, and yeah, okay, to engage with this, I have to put numbers out of the way. I need to be relying on feeling, intuition, not kind of fact and memory. It's
the absence of that which makes it magic, right?
Exactly. Yeah, really seeing something and appreciating how it holds a space and how it might have done that, and then how it is woven into the fabric of what's around it. I lose sense of time. When I'm around an ancient tree, I'm not thinking about time at all. Like almost like I feel like in a cocoon, if you like, in its presence, and all of that stuff just goes out of the window, out of the psyche, and it allows me to reset to something like zero, and then I'm off again.
Yeah, I can relate to that for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I think particularly post Fiji and in the last couple of years on my introspection about my relationship with trees and links to family, and I've spoken before with a couple of people about the link to trees, perhaps replacing the father figure that I lost when I was younger. And moreover, that being about having something to look up to, not just physically, if we want to drop that pun in, but I actually like the squat ones more. But yeah, really just the values of ancient trees, or trees in general, and their gregariousness and their ability to listen, even if they don't have ears, for as long as you might wish or need, and how they're reliable but also extremely vulnerable at the very same time.
It's this symbiotic relationship that you feel like they're there for you, but you have to return the favor. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, so that's a little summary.
I like that. That's good. Yeah, I think people enjoy hearing a bit more of your thoughts. You ask a lot of questions to people, and I find a lot of your listeners would have built a relationship with you. You should basically have a flipped one where you get someone in to do a podcast on you on your podcast. Yeah, that's my advice.
Episode 18 is a bit of that, actually.
Oh, okay,
if you go to that one.
All right, we'll have to check that out.
But having said that, Luke, like I'm continually reviewing what trees mean to me, and that is influenced by meeting people like you've, even just our chat today over the last hour or so. you've supercharged certain elements that will now become more present in how I experience trees or
Likewise, yeah.
consider them. And that's what I love about this, really, is that, you will have, given me a new filter. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And I'm going to hand to you now for a final message for our listeners.
A final message. Final message. So this is an interesting concept, because I am much better at communicating things through my artwork and my imagery. So the idea of coming up with a final message in a sentence or phrase is quite intimidating to me. But nonetheless, I think really, I would ask people listening, I would ask you, but I feel like you've cemented this, to, instead of kind of looking at nature as something other, it's just that we are nature, we are one, it's an aspect of ourselves. And I think that when you do make that connection, I'm sure a lot of your listeners have made that connection, and will kind of understand that once you've made it, you feel more yourself. And I think that's the way of doing it. And the way I do it is through drawing. So I believe the world will be a better place. This is when I do I'm a bit of a preacher, is when it comes to drawing, not nature, but drawing, is that I do encourage everyone and anyone to draw their surroundings. And I think in the context of our conversation today, if I could tempt some people to go out into the woods or their nearest place where there's a tree and just spend some time, doesn't have to be a huge amount of time, it could be an hour, sat drawing a tree, and that will be the way they connect with it. It's just so beneficial. And I, I've been lucky that I've done some workshops, worked with some schools, trying to encourage people to go out there and draw trees. We've gone out drawing in groups, and it's completely transformative. So I don't know if it was really the frame of final message you were looking for, but I guess I would summarize it in go and draw a tree.
You've been listening to the Meaning of Trees podcast. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And see you next time.